Hello. My name is Elizabeth Vale. And the last time I saw my sister, she poured red wine on my face, in front of senators, CEOs, and cameras, because she thought I didn't belong there. She called me an intruder. The truth? I was the one who signed the checks that built half the room. For years, my family erased me, cut me out of photos, out of wills, out of memories. They wanted silence, and I gave it to them until that night. Because when the woman you call uninvited turns out to control a $50 billion defense budget, you start to wonder, how much of your life has been built on a lie? The first thing I noticed when I walked into the Vale Luxe ballroom was how bright it was, too bright. Light spilled from chandeliers the size of cars, glittering across crystal glasses and sequined dresses. Everything gleamed, including the people. They stood in little circles, smiling too wide, their laughter rehearsed, their eyes darting just long enough to make sure the right people were watching. I kept my head down. My heels clicked softly against the marble as I moved along the edge of the crowd, past gold-framed portraits of my parents that hung like warnings. Family legacy, 30 years of Vale Butte. The words wrapped around the ballroom in looping cursive letters, printed on banners, napkins, even the ice sculptures. Their legacy. Not mine. I'd been gone for almost 12 years. Afghanistan, Germany, D.C., places where people called me ma'am and meant it. Tonight, I was just a shadow trying not to take up space in a room built by my family's name. 2 weeks earlier, a white envelope had arrived at my office. No return address, no signature. Inside was a single card, Vale Butte Anniversary Gala. No mention of who was invited. No name printed where it should have said Ms. Elizabeth Vale. Just blank space, as if someone had hesitated before deciding I wasn't worth identifying. I'd called my middle sister, Lumen, that same afternoon. She sounded distracted, her voice wrapped in polite distance. "Hey, I got an invitation to the gala," I said. A pause. Then, "Oh, really? That's interesting. Was I supposed to?" "I'm not sure, Liz. You know how these things are organized. Probably just a formality." "Right," I murmured. "A formality." Isolde, the oldest, didn't pick up when I tried her line. She never did anymore. Now here I was, 2 weeks later, standing at the edge of their empire. The air smelled like roses and expensive perfume. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of champagne. The floor-to-ceiling windows reflected a skyline that seemed to look down on me. "Can I help you, ma'am?" a young man asked, holding a silver tray. His tone wasn't rude, just unsure. His eyes flicked from my dark suit to the guest list on his tablet. "I'm fine," I said. He hesitated. "Are you part of the event staff?" "No," I smiled just enough. "I'm family." "Oh. Of course." He blushed and hurried away. It wasn't his fault. I didn't exactly look like the Vale daughters people saw in magazines. No diamond necklace, no designer gown. Just a tailored navy suit and a pair of old pumps that had traveled across more continents than most of the guests here could name. Across the room, I saw them, Isolde and Lumen. They stood under a spotlight, both flawless in champagne-colored dresses, smiling for photographers. Flashbulbs went off like tiny explosions. Their hair shimmered under the lights, perfectly styled, perfectly fake. I caught Lumen's gaze for a second. She looked startled, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Isolde didn't look at me at all. I moved closer to the back, picking up a glass of water from a passing tray. "Not wine. Never wine." My mother's voice still lingered in my head, a memory as fragile as it was persistent. "Don't let their silence erase who you are." Mom had said that years ago, during one of her lucid days before the illness took her completely. She'd gripped my hand so tight I thought she'd never let go. "You hear me, Lizzie? You're not the background. You're not what they say." Now, as the crowd swelled with music and chatter, I stood alone, clutching that glass like an anchor. The night dragged on. Speeches. Toasts. Isolde's voice floated across the speakers, gracious, confident, rehearsed. She thanked investors, praised the company's family values, never once mentioning me. When the applause faded, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall behind the stage. For a moment, I saw what they saw, a woman out of place. But under that reflection was something else, a stillness they'd mistaken for weakness. The band shifted to a slower tune, and I turned toward the buffet to escape the noise. That's when I heard her voice, sharp and polished like the edge of a blade. "Excuse me," she said behind me. We didn't invite press. I turned. Isolde stood there, a glass of red wine in her hand. Her expression was the same one she'd used when I was 12 and spilled juice on her dress, half pity, half disgust. She looked me up and down, not recognizing me yet. I tried to speak, but she kept going. I'm sorry, this area is for family and VIPs only. Isolde, I said softly. Her eyes narrowed. Do I know you? You should. There was a flicker of confusion, then realization. And then, nothing but anger. You have some nerve showing up here. After all these years? Dressed like this? People nearby began to glance over. I could feel their stares sticking to my skin like humidity. I just came to celebrate, I said quietly. That's all. Oh, please, she snapped, voice carrying. You come here looking like this, expecting what? A photo? A headline? The air went still. My throat burned, but I didn't move. Then, without warning, she tilted the glass and poured the wine straight down my face. It was warm. It ran down my cheek, over my collar, soaking into my shirt. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone whispered my name, but I couldn't tell who. For a heartbeat, I thought the chandelier had gone dim. The music stopped. Time folded in on itself. Isolde's voice came again, low and venomous. Next time, at least try to belong. I blinked. The wine stung my eyes. Around me, no one said a word. Not one person stepped in. I reached up, wiped the liquid from my face with the edge of a napkin, and met her gaze. Her smirk faltered. I didn't yell. I didn't move. I just stood there, breathing slowly, watching her realize that humiliation required an audience, and I'd just taken hers away. Behind her, cameras were already flashing. Somewhere, a phone recorded everything. But I stayed silent. The sound of my heartbeat was louder than the whispers that began to rise again, soft and electric. I put the napkin down, straightened my jacket, and turned toward the stage. If she wanted a scene, she was about to get one. She poured wine on my face. In front of everyone. For a few seconds after it happened, I couldn't move. The red liquid ran down my chin and onto the floor, pooling at my heels, staining the marble like an accusation. I remember the sound of the jazz band faltering mid-song, a trumpet cutting off in a single squeak before silence swallowed the room. Then came the murmurs, the little gasps, the half-whispered "Oh my God," and the rustle of dresses as people leaned in for a better view. I stood there, holding my breath. The glass in Isolde's hand trembled slightly, not out of remorse, but from adrenaline. She hadn't meant to make such a scene, not in front of the donors and investors. But now that everyone was watching, she didn't back down either. She took a slow sip of what was left in her glass, her eyes fixed on mine, as if daring me to react. I didn't. I reached into my clutch, found a small napkin, and pressed it gently against my cheek. The white fabric turned pink almost instantly. The smell of wine mixed with perfume filled my nose, heavy and cloying. My heart was racing, but my face stayed still. People don't know how loud silence can get until it wraps around them. It's the sound of judgment, of curiosity, of people trying to decide which side they're on. Some guests pretended to look away, pretending to check their phones or glance toward the stage, but their eyes always came back. One of the waiters, barely 20, probably working his first big event, froze beside the champagne tower. His mouth was open, his eyes wide, and I wondered if he'd remember this moment for the rest of his life. Don't just stand there, Isolde said sharply to no one in particular. Someone get her cleaned up. Her tone sliced through the air like a blade. No one moved. That's when I realized, she didn't even know who I was. Not really. Not anymore. I dabbed the last drop from my chin, folded the napkin neatly, and placed it on the nearest tray. My reflection in the wine-stained glass caught my eye, calm, measured, unbroken. I could have shouted her name right there, reminded her in front of every camera exactly who she'd just humiliated. But years of military briefings and controlled detonations had trained me better. In chaos, composure is your weapon. That phrase came from Colonel Andrews, my first commanding officer. He'd barked it at me during a training exercise at Fort Benning, when I froze under pressure as the simulation alarms blared. You lose your head, you lose the fight, Vale. I took a slow breath now, the same way I did back then. Deep in, steady out. Control the space around you. The wine was cold against my skin now, drying sticky and sweet. A memory surfaced, the day I received my first star. The medal ceremony had been quiet, simple. The commander pinned it to my uniform, saluted, and moved on. My phone had stayed silent that night. No call from home. I'd told myself they were busy, that maybe congratulations would come later. It never did. The humiliation tonight felt like an echo of that silence, louder, sharper, but familiar. Across the room, Isolde turned to speak to someone, a sponsor, I guessed, and her voice shifted instantly, sweet and polished. She laughed, pretending the scene hadn't happened. So sorry for the little mishap, she said, her smile too bright. Just a misunderstanding. Lumen was standing a few feet away. She looked pale, caught between wanting to intervene and being too afraid to step forward. When our eyes met, she mouthed something that looked like "I'm sorry," but her lips barely moved. Then she turned away, pretending to examine the flower arrangements. I straightened my jacket, adjusting the lapel where the wine had left a faint mark. My throat burned, but not from shame anymore, from resolve. I wouldn't give them a single word they could twist. Behind me, someone whispered, "Who is she?" Someone else replied softly, "I think she's press." Another voice said, "No, that's one of the valets, isn't it? The one who joined the army." And just like that, the room buzzed again. Isolde froze mid-laugh when she heard it. Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp and cold. For a split second, her mask cracked. She knew. And now she was afraid, not of me, but of what it meant that she hadn't recognized me sooner. I walked past her, calm and deliberate, every step a statement. The pianist tried to fill the air with sound again, but the melody came out uneven, broken by the tension that still lingered. I made my way toward the corner where the restrooms were located, just to give myself a few seconds alone. Inside, I ran cool water over my hands and face, watching the red swirl down the drain until it disappeared. In the mirror, my reflection stared back, wet hair clinging to my forehead, mascara smudged near the corner of my eyes. But underneath it, there was steel. I thought about walking out. About calling a car and leaving this building forever, letting them keep their parties, their pride, their empty smiles. But something in me refused to retreat this time. When I stepped back into the ballroom, the energy had shifted. A few people nodded awkwardly as I passed. Others looked away, embarrassed on my behalf. I could feel their pity like heat on my back, but it didn't sting anymore. Pity is only powerful when you accept it. Isolde had gone back to the stage to make another announcement, her voice amplified through the microphone. "Tonight," she said brightly, "we celebrate not just our company, but our shared values, family, dedication, and the courage to evolve." Family. The word landed like a punch. I moved closer to the stage. The crowd parted slightly, part curiosity, part fear of being caught in whatever was about to happen. I walked past the tables where old friends of my parents sat stiffly, avoiding my eyes. "Excuse me," a woman said softly as I passed. She was young, maybe in her 20s, holding her phone up discreetly. "Are you okay, ma'am?" "I'm fine," I said. "But thank you." Her phone was still recording. I didn't stop her. Let the world see what they'd done. I stopped near the foot of the stage. Isolde's words wavered for half a second when she saw me again, standing there, calm, collected, unshaken. She cleared her throat, pretended not to notice. I folded my hands in front of me, smiled slightly, and waited. She went on about loyalty and legacy while my heart beat in perfect rhythm with every word she twisted. When she finally stepped away from the microphone, I took one quiet step forward. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My silence filled the space she thought she owned. I saw Lumen watching me from across the room, her expression torn. She took a tentative step toward me but stopped when Isolde glanced her way. It was then I realized something. This family had built their empire not just on beauty products, but on control. Appearances, reputation, obedience. And I was about to tear that mask off, piece by piece, starting with this moment. I turned toward a nearby waiter and gently took another napkin from his tray. He hesitated, unsure, but handed it to me. I wiped the last trace of wine from my neck, folded the cloth in half, and smiled at him. "Thank you," I said softly. He nodded, wide-eyed, and stepped back. As I moved toward the center of the ballroom, the music finally stopped for good. The host tried to regain control, mumbling something into the microphone, but his voice faded as people turned to watch me instead. For the first time all evening, I felt completely calm. All the years of silence, all the swallowed words, all the small humiliations, they had led to this point. And somehow, I wasn't angry anymore. Just ready. The chandelier above reflected 100 little shards of light onto the floor, tiny fragments that danced across my shoes as I walked. It looked almost like sparks, like something about to ignite. I took one last look at Isolde. Her jaw was tight, her eyes wary, as if she could feel the shift happening but didn't know how to stop it. I smiled at her, slow, deliberate, the kind of smile that says I see you for what you are. Then I straightened my spine and began walking toward the stage. It was time. I had been silent long enough. It was time they listened. Continuing the content of the previous chapter, I had been silent long enough. It was time they listened. When I stepped onto the stage, the low hum of conversation sank into near silence. The spotlight hit me, not in a flattering glow but a stark beam that separated me from the crowd. From the edge of that hotel ballroom in Austin that night, I walked forward with measured steps. I adjusted the lapel of my navy blazer, the same one I'd worn since my return from overseas deployment, and stood before the microphone as though it were a briefing podium. "I'm Elizabeth Vale," I began, my voice crisp, clear. "United States Army. And I oversee the $50 billion defense budget." The words rolled out with precision that surprised even me. They weren't volume shouting, they were fact declaring. The audience froze. Champagne glasses paused mid-sip. Flashbulbs erupted. A young woman near the front raised her phone high. I had become the story they hadn't written. Isolde's face blanched. Her poised expression, the one she'd worn since childhood when cameras followed her every move, cracked for that moment. I saw recognition flicker, then confusion, then fear. I knew most of the people in that room assumed an army general would look like one of those men with medals on their chests, not a woman bending the curve of history. They certainly assumed she, Isolde, wouldn't be challenged. This was not what they expected. I paused, scanning the crowd, allowing the impact of what I said to settle. My thoughts flashed back to Kabul, to the night I read letters from soldiers' families. A father who lost 2 sons. An army wife writing from Texas, too exhausted to sleep. My orders were unflinching: take the file, draft the brief, move on to the next mission. My promotion came silently, a private ceremony, no photos, no dinner with family. I told myself that was fine. I embraced that life. Until tonight. Because when you're hidden long enough, invisibility becomes your burden, and your power. What followed felt like a wave. Murmurs grew to whispers. Flashlights switched to cameras. The MC, a man in a charcoal suit with too many cufflinks, backed away. Reporters in the lobby tuned in via live feed. I heard one reporter mutter to another, they never introduced her as a presenter. I let them hang on the question. Because the truth hung heavier than any punchy tagline. Someone in the crowd gasped aloud. Papers rustled. A little girl, 6 or 7, seated with her parents, looked pointedly at me. Her father blocked her view. I felt for that child. I remembered when I was 9 and I asked my mother, "When am I going to matter?" Her cheek was cold that day. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "When you stop waiting to matter and just act like you do." The applause finally soared, tentatively, then full on. It was not for Isolde tonight, it was for me. I could feel that shift. The balloon of status and illusions began to deflate. The chanting music started, slow sax prolonged in the background, a drink cart rattled off to the side, laughter resumed but lesser. I let my eyes rest on the banner behind the stage, Vale Butte, 30 years of excellence. A slogan cast like a shield. But excellence doesn't hide truth. And I was about to show it. A reporter barked, "General Vale. Can we verify your title?" I leaned into the microphone, kept the volume calm. "Please do," I said. "You'll find records at the Pentagon." The hush deepened. In that moment, I owned the power they tried to deny me. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about recognition, and about protection for the next generation of women who thought they couldn't play the game because they didn't look like the players. When I stepped off the stage to the side entrance, I pulled out my phone. I flicked the camera app, taking a selfie, not for vanity, but to remember that moment. The hall lights broke into a sparkle behind me. I caught Isolde in the reflection, alone. No banners. No flash. No support. Just her. On the drive back to the base, I leaned my head against the window of the SUV and watched the Texas landscape blur. Lights zipped by. My mind replayed the splash of wine, the napkin, the phantom whispers. I thought of Lumen waiting at home, unsure, worried. I thought of the father who never called. And I let it go. Because tonight, I was more than a sister in the shadows. I was a general, and I knew they were listening now. Continuing the content of the previous chapter, I had been silent long enough. It was time they listened. When I stepped onto the stage, the low hum of conversation sank into near silence. The spotlight hit me, not in a flattering glow but a stark beam that separated me from the crowd. From the edge of that hotel ballroom in Austin that night, I walked forward with measured steps. I adjusted the lapel of my navy blazer, the same one I'd worn since my return from overseas deployment, and stood before the microphone as though it were a briefing podium. "I'm Elizabeth Vale," I began, my voice crisp, clear. "United States Army. And I oversee the $50 billion defense budget." The words rolled out with precision that surprised even me. They weren't volume shouting, they were fact declaring. The audience froze. Champagne glasses paused mid-sip. Flashbulbs erupted. A young woman near the front raised her phone high. I had become the story they hadn't written. Isolde's face blanched. Her poised expression, the one she'd worn since childhood when cameras followed every move, cracked for a moment. I saw recognition flicker, then confusion, then fear. I knew most of the people in that room assumed an army general would look like one of those men with medals on their chests, not a woman who quietly redirected drones from Kabul to protect civilian lives. They certainly assumed she, Isolde, wouldn't be challenged. This was not what they expected. I paused, letting the air settle. My thoughts flicked back to Kandahar, to fog-light dawns and boots in the dust. I remembered the nights when soldiers' letters came in and I responded alone, "We will honor his service." No celebrations followed. The promotions arrived in tiny folders, no phone calls, no fanfare. I accepted that. Until tonight. I watched as a reporter pushed through the crowd and asked, "General Vale, can we verify your title?" I shifted my stance, allowed a slow breath. "Please do. You'll find my name in the Pentagon files." The silence tightened around the question like a vice. The murmur spread deeper this time. The woman filming gave a little nod. I recognized that glint. I was no longer invisible. A mentor's voice echoed in my memory, "In chaos, composure is your weapon." I grounded myself in that wisdom. If they expected me to explode, to rage and collapse, they'd miscalculated entirely. On the stage, Isolde attempted a return to script, "Thank you, guests, our legacy," but her interruptions faltered. They had rehearsed her words, they hadn't rehearsed mine. I descended the steps beside the stage onto the patterned carpet, moving toward the back exit so I wouldn't block the audience's view. The bass of the band resumed, heavier now, like the heartbeat of a city in motion. I turned a corner and paused near a high table holding untouched dessert towers. A waiter darted by, teetering. I placed a hand to steady him. "Thanks," I said quietly. "Just doing my job, for once, out front." He looked at me with new eyes. Back in the hallway's muted glow, I grabbed my phone and checked the live stream. Taglines ran, "The Vale daughter wasn't ignored after all, Army General storms fashion gala." I closed the phone and tucked it away. I wasn't here to become a meme. I was here to shift a narrative. Over the next hour, when the gala wrapped up and guests moved toward the lobby and valet, I slipped outside to the terrace. The Texas sky had darkened, the city lights of Austin glowed like a constellation of possibilities. I stood with my arms crossed and looked back at the silhouette of the hotel. Here I was, returning to the family empire's front door, even though I'd spent years building a different empire altogether. My phone buzzed gently. I ignored it. I didn't want to be interrupted by business matters or sisterly texts. I just inhaled deep the warm October air, carrying the hum of traffic and distant music. The dwarf night felt brief. I allowed myself a moment of calm. But calm didn't last long. When I went back inside, I found Isolde waiting in the lobby, leaning against the marble fountain. Her face was pale, her mask of composure cracking as though she'd just realized the guests weren't the only ones watching. She opened her mouth, her words clipped, "Interesting speech. You created quite a stir." I nodded. "Thank you for the invitation." She laughed dryly. "You're welcome, I suppose. Just try not to embarrass us again." I gave her a soft smile. Embarrassment only occurs when the person being hurt remains silent. She blinked, surprised. I turned and walked away, heels echoing on the marble floor. In my car afterward, I sat alone and reviewed the evening's footage in my mind. I held on to the memory of her glass, the red wine spill, the reflections of camera lights in the pool of sound and confusion. Something had shifted. I felt it. And I knew what the next step would be. Continuing from the previous chapter, but someone did think I was worth mentioning. And she had proof. A faint hum of applause still echoed unchecked as the projector glowed to life on the far wall of the ballroom. I watched Lumen rise from her reserved seat near the media tables and walk straight to the center of the room. The genteel chatter died down as she raised the USB stick in her hand. My heart pricked, not from fear, but from the memory of being overlooked for so long. This was the moment the narrative shifted. The screen flickered. Lumen's voice came through clear, "There's something else the family forgot to mention tonight." The words landed like thunder in that golden-lit room in Austin, Texas. Patrons leaned forward, the room held its breath. Adrenaline raced quietly in my veins, but I remained steady. I had trained myself to hold the line when things unraveled. On the display, I watched Isolde, my older sister, the one whose image lit magazine covers, hand a heavy envelope to a legal assistant in a sleek office downtown. I recognized the setting, the Vale family headquarters, mahogany panels and a towering safe behind. Her voice, discreet, "Make sure Liz doesn't have a claim. Delete the clause. It's been in the family too long." The assistant nodded, clearing documents and replacing one folder with another. Signatures were forged. Numbers altered. It looked deliberate and old money familiar, the kind of quiet ambition that wore a smile but had claws. Gasps flowed through the audience as the scene played out again, Isolde's bystander posture, the assistant's frown, the envelope sliding across the conference table. I felt a crack in my chest, but not from helplessness. From vindication. People who thought they owned stories now watched a story owning them. I turned slightly to look at Lumen beside me. Her lips trembled ever so often, her eyes were clear. No longing to hide. No attempt to make jewelry-polished excuses. For the first time in decades, here was my sister standing for me. Lumen said, voice firm, "I was quiet too long. Tonight, I stand with my sister, the real leader in this family." Applause filled the room, a wave building and cresting. Isolde's face drained of color. I studied the lines around her lips, tiny fractures in what had always been a practiced facade. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched. Because strength isn't always loud, it's deliberate. Later that evening, when the gala guests had been escorted out and the chandeliers turned off, I found myself standing alone in the corridor behind the ballroom. I held the USB stick in my pocket. I stared at the carpet pattern, deep burgundy vines twisting across ivory. I thought of how I'd walked these floors as a child, trailing behind image makers and fans of my sister's beauty pageant smile. Back then, I never imagined I'd have a story worth telling. But tonight I did. My phone buzzed. It was one of my contacts from the Pentagon, just 2 words, "Well done." I nodded. But I didn't act on it. Because the truth needed no applause. I pressed the button to call the valet service and walked outside into the cool air. The Texas breeze held the scent of cedar and distant traffic. I inhaled deeply. My uniform hung in my closet at home. Here I wore a dark dress and neutral shoes, but the posture was the same, upright, unyielding. When the sedan pulled up, I walked to the back seat. The door clicked shut and I leaned back, letting the city lights sweep past. My phone screen flashed notifications. Breaking, family empire in turmoil, Vale Butte shares tumble, who is Elizabeth Vale? I locked the phone. My mission wasn't over, but the map had changed. At home later that night, I opened the ancient drawer in my study and retrieved the small leather-bound journal Mom had given me before she died. Inside, she'd scribbled, "Don't let their silence erase who you are." I turned the page, the pen handwriting flowing gentle. I wrote one line of my own, "Tonight, I made them listen." Lumen texted, "Together." I stood in the dim light of the living room, holding the journal, and felt something shift inside me, a subtle but irrevocable tide turning. The next day, when the photographers swarmed the Vale estate, and shareholders demanded explanations, I was already at the base, reviewing logistics for the new training exercise. I wore my rank, my real identity. No ceremony. No tribute party. Just purpose. Because real influence works when you're not looking for thanks. Isolde called me later in the afternoon. Her voice was thin. "I want to talk," she said. In private. I considered how many times I had trusted offers like that, and how rarely they delivered anything but deeper deceit. I replied, calm, we'll talk when the truth is clear. I prefer my conversations under daylight, not spotlights. She paused. I hung up. There was a silence afterward, my kind of silence. The one where your mind is at work, shifting gears. The one where you don't respond to eggshell threats or carefully worded lies. This time, I held the pen, and she was reading from my script. Continuing from the previous chapter, she stood with me. But what she exposed next would shake everything further. The morning after the gala felt unnaturally quiet. Even the air around the Vale mansion seemed heavier, as though the marble walls themselves had heard every word from last night and were bracing for the fallout. I drove up the long driveway slowly, past the trimmed hedges that looked as staged as the family that lived behind them. My phone buzzed non-stop with messages from journalists, Pentagon colleagues, and even a few old soldiers who'd seen the viral clips online. I silenced them all. There was only one conversation left that mattered, and it needed to happen face to face. I'd asked Isolde to meet me at the estate's library. The room was our father's pride, an echo chamber of mahogany, crystal, and old ambition. When I stepped in, the morning sun stretched long across the carpet, illuminating shelves full of books that no one in the family had touched in years. Isolde was already there, seated by the fireplace, coffee cup balanced neatly on her knee like nothing had changed. She looked up, calm as a snake basking in the light. You came. I wasn't sure if you'd have the nerve after last night's display. I closed the door behind me. Don't confuse composure with cowardice. She tilted her head. I see you're still fond of those military one-liners. Do they teach you that in basic training, how to embarrass your family in public? I ignored the jab and walked toward the mantel, my heel steady against the wood. You embarrassed yourself, Isolde. Lumen only showed them what you've been hiding for years. Her smile didn't falter, but her fingers tightened around the porcelain cup. Do you think anyone believes that? Money talks. PR spins. A week from now, this will all disappear. I met her gaze directly. No, it won't. Because if you try to bury me, or what Lumen exposed, I'll make sure every lie you ever told sees daylight. Every signature, every deal, every stolen piece of inheritance. She laughed, light and sharp, like glass shattering. What will you do, write a strongly worded memo to Congress? That was the thing about Isolde, she'd been protected for so long, she still thought the world bent around her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even move closer. I just said quietly, no. I'll do something far more effective. I'll tell the truth, and I won't stop until you choke on it. For a moment, the only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. Then she set her cup down and stood, her tone changing to mock pity. You've always had that savior complex, Liz. Always trying to fix what's broken. But this family doesn't want to be saved. We built something you could never understand. I took a slow breath. You built an illusion. I built something real. I turned toward the shelves, running my hand along the spines of old ledgers. The air smelled faintly of dust and citrus polish. Behind the desk, a drawer sat slightly ajar, just enough to catch the light. You shouldn't snoop, Isolde said, her tone suddenly sharp. I wasn't planning to, I replied, pulling the drawer open before she could stop me. Inside, wrapped in thin white tissue, was something I hadn't seen in over a decade, my Distinguished Service Medal. I froze. The edges of the ribbon were still crisp, untouched by time. I had thought I'd misplaced it years ago during a move between bases. My throat tightened. You told me you never found it, I said softly. Isolde's expression flickered, just for a second. You're overreacting. I kept it safe. You left it behind. No, I said, my voice low, each word measured. You took it. You hid it. Because the last thing you wanted was anyone knowing your little sister had something you couldn't buy. Her silence told me I was right. Memories hit me like a storm, the day I'd earned that medal, standing alone in a room full of uniforms and salutes. No family in the audience. No calls afterward. I'd convinced myself they were busy. That maybe they didn't know. But now I understood. She had made sure of that. I placed the medal carefully on the desk between us. Do you know what this represents, Isolde? It's not about power. It's about sacrifice, something you've never understood. Her jaw clenched. Spare me the moral lecture. You think you're better because you wore a uniform? Because people salute you? No, I said. I think I'm better because when I make a promise, I keep it. even when it costs me everything. We stared at each other for a long moment, two reflections of the same childhood split by greed and guilt. Then I picked up the medal, folded the tissue back around it, and tucked it into my pocket. "This isn't about revenge," I said finally. "This is your last chance to make it right. You want to hold on to the company? Fine. But if you ever use my name again, or Lumen's, to cover your mess, you'll wish the cameras from last night were still rolling." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You wouldn't dare." I gave her a small, almost pitying smile. "Try me." Then I turned and walked toward the door. My footsteps echoed against the hardwood like a drumbeat, steady, final. I didn't look back. Outside, the morning sun had climbed higher, glinting off the fountain where we used to play as children. The water still sparkled, but I could see now how shallow it really was. I took the medal from my pocket and turned it in my hand, feeling the cool metal warm against my skin. That little piece of bronze had been hidden in her drawer all those years, proof that she'd tried to erase not just my name, but my worth. And now, it was mine again. I walked down the steps, past the manicured gardens, and out to the car. As I started the engine, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, I saw not the forgotten sister, not the quiet soldier, but the woman who'd finally stopped waiting for permission to exist. As the mansion shrank in the distance, I whispered to myself, no more secrets. No more silence. The phone on the passenger seat buzzed again, a news alert flashing across the screen, Vale heiress under investigation for fraud. I smiled. Actions have consequences, I said aloud. And this time, I meant every word. Continuing from the previous chapter, I warned her. She didn't listen. So I gave the world the truth. The morning after I sent the evidence, the world woke up before I did. My phone vibrated so hard on the nightstand it nearly slid to the floor. By the time I opened my eyes, the headlines had already taken on a life of their own. Army officer lied about rank? Elizabeth Vale, decorated or delusional? Gala general sparks controversy. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, my pulse steady but my stomach sinking. I'd seen misinformation campaigns before, abroad, in places where propaganda was a weapon. But I never thought it would come from my own bloodline. It started subtly. Anonymous Twitter accounts questioned my credentials. No record of a General Vale, one post read. Pentagon silence speaks volumes. Then a wave of blog posts appeared within an hour, all written in the same rhythm, the same tone, manufactured outrage. They questioned my service history, my deployments, even my gender, as if I were some fabrication wearing medals I'd stolen. By noon, mainstream outlets began picking up the noise. That was how it worked, create enough smoke, and even the cleanest sky looked like a fire. Lumen called me from Los Angeles, her voice low and strained. "It's her," she said before I could speak. I checked. She paid a private PR firm, Holloway Strategies. They're behind every post, every article. Of course she was. Isolde didn't know how to admit defeat. She only knew how to buy her way around it. I stood by the window of my San Antonio apartment, the blinds casting thin stripes of light across the floor. From here, I could see the outer fences of the base, glinting under the mid-morning sun. It grounded me. The noise outside those fences wasn't my reality. But it was fast becoming my battlefield. Let them talk, I told Lumen. They think reputation is built on headlines. I build mine on truth. Still, that evening, as I walked through the corridors of the base, I could feel the unease. Soldiers nodded respectfully, but there was curiosity in their eyes. Rumors traveled faster than facts. A young lieutenant stopped me by the briefing room. "Ma'am," he said awkwardly, "if there's anything we can do to, verify." I cut him off gently. "You don't need to verify my history, Lieutenant. You've served under my command. You already know." He nodded quickly, embarrassed, and stepped aside. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, scrolling through the endless tide of speculation. Every story, every lie, felt designed to wear me down. I had endured rocket attacks, bureaucratic politics, and years of isolation in a man's world, but this? This was a new kind of war, invisible, digital, ruthless. By dawn, I'd gathered every document I needed, deployment orders, commendation letters, personnel evaluations, even an image of the letter signed by the Secretary of Defense confirming my position. I didn't plan to leak them myself. I had a better idea. When the world tries to drown you in noise, you find the one voice that cuts through it. That voice arrived 3 days later, wearing a name I hadn't heard in years, Lieutenant Colonel Darren Klein, Ret. Darren was a military journalist now, but we'd served together in Kabul. He'd been one of the few men who treated me as an equal, not a token. He called me after the first round of attacks went viral. I saw what they're saying, he began. Do you want me to handle this, or do you want to stay quiet and let me do it anyway? Handle it, I said simply. But make sure the facts speak louder than the noise. 2 days later, his article dropped like a grenade. I served beside General Elizabeth Vale. She's not just qualified. She's historic. The headline blazed across every major platform within hours. Darren wrote with precision, not sentiment. He detailed operations we'd led together, missions classified until recently. He included photographs, me in the field, not the ballrooms, reports bearing my name and signature, commendations no PR firm could fake. He verified it all with internal military records. He ended with a line that hit harder than any defense I could have written. You can buy publicity, but you can't buy legacy. Elizabeth Vale earned hers. The backlash turned on its axis overnight. Those same accounts that had called me a fraud now deleted their posts. The blogs vanished or issued clarifications. By evening, the hashtag General Vale trended across the country, not as scandal, but as redemption. One of the news anchors even called it a modern-day smear turned masterclass in integrity. I sat in my office as the sunset poured gold across the blinds. My email pinged again, a message from Darren. Told you truth travels slower, but it lasts longer. I smiled. It always does, I murmured. Then I opened a new message window. The recipients, every board member of Vale Butte, including Isolde. I attached Darren's article, along with the verified documentation. The subject line read, "For your consideration, leadership review." No anger. No dramatics. Just the clean precision of a soldier making her final move. When I hit send, I leaned back in my chair. Outside, the hum of the bass continued as usual, helicopters lifting, boots on asphalt, commands echoing through radios. Life went on, steady and certain. But I knew the next morning would not be business as usual at Vale Butte. Because for the first time in decades, the truth wasn't just mine to bear. It was public record. And Isolde couldn't buy her way out of that. Continuing from the previous chapter, she thought I'd stay silent again. She was wrong. Dead wrong. The morning the earthquake hit Vale Butte wasn't made of rumbling ground, it was made of silence. That sharp, eerie kind of silence that comes before a building gives way. I woke early in San Antonio, brewed my coffee black, and opened my laptop. My inbox was full again, news alerts, forwarded emails, questions from reporters I didn't know. But one subject line stood out, written in bold, urgent, board meeting footage recovered. It was from Lumen. I clicked it open and saw a single sentence, "You'll want to see this before they do." Attached was a short video file and a timestamp. It was from 3 months earlier, taken from the security system inside Vale Butte headquarters. When I hit play, the room filled with the hum of a corporate office, the clicking of pens, muffled footsteps, someone shifting papers nervously. Then, Isolde's voice, smooth and deliberate, "No one will miss her. Make it disappear." The attorney in the frame, a man named Richard Hollis, the family's longtime legal counsel, looked visibly uneasy. "Ms. Vale, that's not how the trust was written. We'd have to amend the signatures." Isolde leaned forward, handing him a sealed envelope. "That's your bonus. Do it." My stomach twisted, not from surprise but from recognition. The same cold tone she'd used when she cut me out of our mother's will, the same calm cruelty she'd mastered years ago. I sat there, letting the audio play until the screen froze mid-frame, Isolde's manicured hand extended, the envelope halfway across the desk. It was the kind of image no publicist could polish, no lawyer could bury. By the time I arrived at the base's command office that morning, my phone had already erupted with messages again. The footage had leaked. Somehow, though I had a very good guess how, it had found its way to several business journalists and activist investors. An emergency meeting of the Vale Butte board was called for noon. I didn't attend in person. I didn't need to. Through Lumen's secure video link, I watched as Isolde strutted into the boardroom wearing that same white silk blouse she wore for every press shoot, her armor of composure. But this time, The eyes around the table didn't hold admiration. They held suspicion. "Let's get this over with," she said briskly. "Whatever this video is, it's fake. Deepfakes are everywhere now. Surely you don't think." "Play the file," one of the older members interrupted. His tone was flat, exhausted. Someone hit a button, and the large screen at the front of the room flickered to life. There it was again, her voice, her face, her words. "No one will miss her. Make it disappear." The boardroom went still. You could almost hear the collective breath catch. Isolde's jaw tightened. "That's edited," she said quickly. "It's malicious, probably from my sister. She's been orchestrating this from the start." But her words didn't land the way they used to. The charm was gone. The board had seen too much, read too many headlines, fielded too many investor calls in the last 24 hours. One member leaned back, hands clasped. "Do you deny authorizing payments to Holloway Strategies to defame your sister?" Isolde blinked. "That's absurd." "Because we have the invoice." I could almost feel the air being sucked out of the room. For once, the woman who always had a script had run out of lines. The footage ended. The silence that followed was brutal. Then the board chair, an older woman with sharp eyes and a steady voice, spoke. "Effective immediately, Isolde Vale is suspended from her position as Chief Executive Officer pending investigation." I watched as my sister's face crumpled, not in tears, but in disbelief. She stood abruptly. "You can't do this." "I am Vale Butte." The chair replied simply, "No. You were." Within an hour, every major outlet carried the story. Beauty CEO's ugly truth. Vale empire shaken by fraud and family scandal. Hashtags surged, Isolde exposed, Vale fall, justice for Elizabeth. Former employees began speaking out, their stories flooding social media, accounts of intimidation, verbal abuse, unpaid overtime. The dam had broken. I didn't celebrate. I sat quietly at my desk, sipping coffee gone cold. When justice finally comes, it doesn't roar, it exhales. Later that afternoon, Lumen called. "It's done," she said softly. "She's been removed." The board voted unanimously. "Where is she now?" I asked. "At the estate. Reporters are camped at the gates. She hasn't come out." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words settle. The mighty Isolde Vale, who once commanded rooms with her charm and cruelty, was now a prisoner in her own mansion. That evening, after the news cycle had slowed, I drove out to the hill overlooking the city. The skyline of San Antonio glowed under the fading orange light. I thought of everything that had brought us here, years of silence, of manipulation, of pretending the cracks weren't there. My phone buzzed again. It was a message from an unknown number. "You think this is over? It's not." I stared at the screen, knowing exactly who had sent it. Isolde never went quietly. I typed back one line, "You're right. It's only just begun." Then I deleted her message and blocked the number. Some truths destroy. Others rebuild. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace, mixed with purpose. I didn't fight this war for revenge. I fought it for the right to exist without being erased. And as far as I was concerned, that was a battle I had already won. Continuing from the previous chapter, she lost everything. But I wasn't done yet. When I arrived at the elder care facility outside Houston around mid-afternoon, the sky was heavy with the promise of rain. The driveway was lined with aging oaks, their branches drooping slightly as if tired, just like I felt. Not from defeat, but from something deeper, an ache that isn't fixed by victories. I parked at the curb and stepped out of the car, the soft hum of traffic on the nearby highway echoing behind the walls of the building. I carried a copy of the editorial that had turned everything, and tucked carefully into my jacket pocket, my Distinguished Service Medal. I wasn't sure he'd remember either one. My father sat by a window in the common room, a pale light filtering through the blinds, illuminating the faint lines on his face. Alzheimer's had clouded him gradually, but in that moment he looked like the man who'd taught me how to read a map before teaching me how to lead a platoon. His breathing was steady, and he gazed toward the trees outside, not at me. I cleared my throat softly and crouched beside his chair. "Dad," I said quietly. "It's me, Elizabeth." He turned slowly, and his eyes, once so sharp, were glazed with confusion. He nodded, faintly. "Elizabeth," he said, voice small. "My pride." Tears came then, unbidden, for both of us. Not shame, but relief. The word, pride, from him was heavier than any medal I ever earned, heavier than any gala, any boardroom. It wasn't public recognition, it was a father's quiet acknowledgement. Our talk didn't last long. 3 sentences later his attention drifted back to the trees, and I knew that was it. But that single moment weighed more than 1,000 speeches. Walking out of the room, the gentle beeping of nurse call buttons felt too loud. I found Lumen waiting in the hallway near a window overlooking the garden. She held a framed photograph, the kind printed once and kept in boxes, dust gathered at the edges. "Sit with me for a minute?" she asked. We stepped into a small seating area, green chairs, a low table. The photograph rested between us. It showed 3 sisters, Isolde, Lumen, and me, standing outside the same mansion I had left behind. In the picture my face was cropped out, as if someone decided I didn't belong in the memory. I knew that photo had been altered years ago, but seeing the original made something inside me click. Lumen took a breath. "I found the original," she said. "She photoshopped you out, then sent the altered version for the family album." I ran a finger along the edge of the photo frame. My missing place in that picture had been erased. Now it was restored. I placed my hand on top of hers. "Thanks," I said quietly. We sat there in silence for a while, no speeches, no accusations, just 2 sisters who had walked different paths but ended up here together. When I got back to my apartment that evening, I didn't log into any news feed. I didn't read about Isolde's losses or the public scandals. Instead I settled into the leather armchair near my window and opened a plain envelope, the inheritance check I chose not to deposit. Instead I wrote a memo to the board of the scholarship fund I'd chosen for female veterans. The money wasn't for me, it was for them. Because the battle I'd fought wasn't about revenge. It was about making space for the quiet dignity of service. The room was warm with lamplight. The city lights reflected in the window behind me, bits of orange and violet. I placed the medal on the side table, the metal cool, its surface reflecting the light in a soft glint. I closed my eyes and felt a strange peace settle inside. Still, the silence wasn't empty. It carried memory, healing, and a promise, I would not vanish again. As I leaned back and watched the night deepen outside, I realized closure doesn't always come clean. Some wounds stay visible so others know what happened. Some victories are silent. But power rarely announces itself, they sense it. They feel it. And tonight, I think they feel mine. Continuing from the previous chapter, forgiveness isn't always spoken. But I left with something more powerful. The sun was low over the Texas horizon as I walked the familiar pavement of the base in San Antonio. My boots were polished, my uniform pressed. On my chest, the Distinguished Service Medal glinted, a symbol I had once thought lost, hidden away by betrayal and oversight. The cadets filing past in formation didn't know the story behind it, and that was fine. What I carried wasn't about recognition, it was about truth. I paused at the walkway's edge, watching a younger female cadet approach from the opposite direction. She carried a duffel bag over her shoulder, hair pulled in a neat bun, eyes steady. As she passed, she came to attention and saluted. "Good evening, ma'am," she said. I offered a nod. "Good evening, cadet." She held the salute a fraction longer, then relaxed. I felt a quiet warmth in that brief exchange, the passing of the torch, unspoken yet understood. We'd built these bases for moments like this, women in uniform who don't have to ask permission to serve. I thought of the gala, the wine, the stage, it all felt distant now, like the tail end of a bad dream. Back then I might have cringed, hesitated, faded into the background again. But tonight I walked on purpose. I found a quiet bench near the flight line. The roar of helicopters faded as dusk settled, replaced by the hum of distant lights and the smell of warm tarmac. I unpinned the medal from my pocket and slipped it over the top of the bench. I examined the ribbon, no cracks, no wear. It had been wrapped in tissue for years until I found it in Isolde's drawer. Now it sat under the open sky, exposed and unafraid. In that moment I reflected, they tried to define me by what I wasn't. They said I wasn't important. I became someone they couldn't ignore. The truth I revealed wasn't just for me, it was for every woman in rooms that said, "You don't belong here," for every sister erased from the family picture, for every soldier who knew she had a right to fight and a right to be seen. Later that evening, I sat at my desk in the annex building, looking out the window at the base lights twinkling like urban stars. I opened a letter from a young cadet, a simple blue envelope, heavy with hope. Inside, the note read, "You're why I joined." I laid the letter beside the metal. They balanced each other, a symbol of service and the cost of recognition. My thoughts drifted to the family back home. I hadn't gone back to the estate. I didn't need the show of celebration, the speeches, the veneer of normalcy. Isolde was gone from living room opulence to board investigations. The company used to rumble under her command, now it trembled under the weight of truth and accountability. Lumen had launched her charity for siblings affected by inheritance fraud, quiet but steady, like the good work we both believed didn't need spotlight. And Father, I visited him monthly, held his hand in that quiet nursing home outside Houston, where for a single breath he called me my pride. Nothing more needed to be said. Power isn't about who shouts the loudest, it's about who continues when the cameras leave. I stood in a room full of accolades, but the only voice I answered to was my own. Earning the medal wasn't the same as accepting the legacy, and they tried to deny both. But I reclaimed them. My phone pinged, it was a news alert, Vale Butte rebrands as veteran-led foundation. I closed the screen. The headline swirled through the media cycle, but I didn't need to chase it. The story had settled. The faster you chase recognition, the more you remain unreachable. I was reachable in that moment, grounded. I rose from my chair and walked over to a velvet board mounted on the wall of my office. Carefully, I pinned the medal to the board, just beneath the letter. I stepped back, looked at the display, and felt something settle in my chest. It wasn't just a sense of victory, it was acceptance. I had built more than a reputation. I had built a home in my own skin. Outside, the base gate lights blinked green. Cadets streamed in and out, dreams heavy and fresh. I watched them for a moment, then turned back to my desk, shut off the light, and walked to the door. I wasn't an intruder, I said softly to the room. I was the legacy they tried to hide. But now, the world knows my name. And this time, when I speak, I know they're listening. Sometimes the people who try the hardest to erase us are the ones who fear our truth the most. But dignity, true dignity, doesn't need permission to shine. This wasn't just a story about betrayal, it was about reclaiming identity, legacy, and voice when others tried to silence it. What would you do if your own family treated you like a stranger? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I'd love to hear your perspective. And if this